Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ormond Beach, Florida. I'm JG Pasterjack. This is another edition of Grassroots Motorsports Live, presented by CRC Industries. Let me find you, the viewer, here online, so I can see all of your comments and questions during tonight's exciting show. Thanks for joining us once again tonight. It is a beautiful night here in Ormond Beach. You may notice I am wearing something a little bit different. I have a Eastwood welding jacket on. That's because we are going to be doing some welding tonight. I am very excited. When I posted earlier that we will be learning to weld aluminum today, I did not mean we in the imperial sense. I meant we very much in the literal sense. I am a huge part of that we equation. If you think you are tuning in tonight to watch an expert give you secrets on fabricating aluminum with a MIG welder, sir or madam, you are very going to be very disappointed, because you and I will be learning together how this process works. So before we get into all that, let's talk a little bit about the show. First off, thanks for being here. This is Grassroots Motorsports Live, presented by CRC Industries. You can check them out at crcindustries.com. We're going to be using some of their products tonight, as we do almost every week on the show. Autobooks Aerobooks is also another proud supporter of ours. You can check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. They are our favorite bookstore in the whole world, located right there in Burbank, California. They're not only a fantastic bookstore with tens of thousands of titles available in the store and on the web, they are a hub of automotive culture in Southern California. So if you're ever out there, anywhere between San Diego and Santa Barbara, go check them out. They have live events in the store all the time. I see a lot of our friends at Autobooks Aerobooks joining us already tonight. So thanks for hanging out, and we got a good crowd building up. So let's talk about what we're going to do tonight. We're going to start off with a little bit of science. Tonight we're learning to weld aluminum with a MIG welder. So if you're familiar at all with fabrication, with aluminum fabrication or steel fabrication, you know that a MIG welder is normally associated with steel fabrication. And when you're welding aluminum, you're usually talking about a TIG process. So tonight we're gonna learn a little bit about how to weld aluminum with this MIG welder. So let's talk a little bit about the physical properties of steel and aluminum and why things might be different in welding one of those metals versus the other. So we got actually a good crowd tonight. I should remind everybody, if you're watching tonight on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, throw us a like. There's a little button down there that you can like. You can give us a thumbs up on YouTube. You can give us a like on Facebook, and throw us a share. Let your friends know you are watching the show, and let them join along with us. And if you have any questions this evening, I'm watching the Facebook chat right over here. I'll do my best to answer them, and we will do our best to not injure, mostly me, but not injure anybody here tonight, and have a fun show. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the physical properties of aluminum and steel. One of the reasons aluminum is trickier to weld in general than steel is the melting point. All metals have a point at which they melt. For steel, that temperature is around 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to vary a little bit based on the grade of steel and based on the exact temper of the steel. We can use 2,500 degrees as sort of a general sort of area where steel melts. Aluminum, way different, less than half that actually. Aluminum is usually melted, it's a little bit over 1,200 degrees. It's about 1,230 degrees Fahrenheit aluminum will melt at. So you can see right away that with these welding processes, you're creating heat through a shorted electrical circuit. So you're putting voltage into an electrode, essentially, that's shorting a circuit to this metal, which is then creating that heat. Anybody who's ever laid their watch across the hot terminal on their battery, or hit a ground while they were undoing the hot terminal of their battery, knows that those electrons flowing create a lot of heat. And in the case of welding, that's exactly what we're doing. We're shorting a circuit and creating heat to melt that metal, turn two pieces of metal into one. So we can see that we have a vastly different melt point with aluminum than we do with steel. We also have another property to talk about with both these metals, which is basically what they call the forge point, and that is the point at which the metal becomes plastic, where it becomes soft enough to manipulate the metal without tearing it, without sort of damaging the molecular structure. For steel, that point, around 2100 degrees, 2200 degrees, that's where if you're forging a sword, that's about where you want to heat it to before you start hammering it and bending it, and being able to work that metal without damaging it. For aluminum, it's a much lower temperature. Aluminum, you can start to actually forge. You actually have a forge temperature as low as about 600 degrees. So you see that at a much lower temperature, that aluminum is going to start to soften. It's going to start to change its physical properties a little bit, which is something else that makes it a little bit tricky to weld. The other thing, so check, see if we have any, so Dean says anybody that's ever grounded a battery through a wedding ring knows that, knows about electricity causing heat. That's why I don't wear any jewelry or anything. It probably helps me pick up chicks too. My wife doesn't know about it, but yeah, I don't wear a wedding ring because I'm always working around a bench grinder. I'm always doing something where if that ring got hot, if that ring got caught, it would end poorly for me. Plus, we got parrots, and they would never leave it alone. So it's one of the main reasons I don't wear any jewelry is it's a hazard, and I'm fairly safety conscious. I'm not the most safety conscious guy in the world, but I try and do things that aren't just ridiculously stupid. All right, the other thing we have to talk about with aluminum is basically the surface preparation. One of the things you're going to have to deal with whenever you're welding aluminum is the oxidation layer. So aluminum doesn't rust the way steel does, but it is a reactive metal. It does react, especially in a strongly acidic environment or a strong base environment. Aluminum will react and it will form a layer of oxidation. If anybody has a pool, you know that all the aluminum stuff around your pool, like if you have aluminum furniture or even like your the handle of the brush that you clean your pool with, that's usually aluminum. Any exposed areas on that, because it's in a highly caustic environment with a lot of chlorine around, you get that white powdery coating on that. That is aluminum oxide. So here's the tricky thing about aluminum oxide. Aluminum melts at 1230 degrees. Aluminum oxide is good to about 3300 degrees. So you can see that is a way higher temperature than the base metal. So if you're trying to weld through aluminum oxide, you're going to have a really, really hard time. By the time you blast through that oxide layer, you've long melted the base metal underneath that. So it's very, very important to deal with that oxide layer before you start welding aluminum. We're going to show you how it's been recommended to us to do that before we actually get into working on pieces here. We are going to do some welding, and I'm going to warn you in advance. I've practiced very, very little at this. I am a reasonably effective welder of steel, but I've sort of purposely not practiced very much with aluminum because I want to learn along with you guys tonight in real time. So takeaway message is, if by the end of this show, I, a fourth grade educated, emotionally stunted man-child, can stick two pieces of aluminum together successfully, chances are you'll be able to do a fantastic job with it. So, yeah, Daniel has a question about lasers cleaning metal on that he's seen in ads. I have seen those ads too, sir. What Daniel's talking about is I see all these ads in my social media timeline of these dudes cleaning rusty metal off with this laser gun, which looks like the most awesome thing in the world. It looks far too good to be true. And the little bit of research that I've done on it is the $500 versions are trying to sell you on Facebook are too good to be true. The technology, however, does exist in industrial applications at a much higher price. does work and is starting to trickle down into the consumer market. And hopefully before long, that's going to be a real thing that you can actually buy a working one and not just a, one that will take a tiny little sliver of rust off of a thin piece of metal. So yeah, I am just as excited about that as anyone, and cannot wait for that to be a thing. Because look, welding is like painting. Your prep is half the battle. By the time, if your prep is lousy, your finished job is going to be lousy, and if your prep is good, you're going to be able to get away with a lot more during the actual job. So, take the time, and safety, whatever. Okay, so let's talk about the machine a little bit. You're setting up a MIG to do aluminum. You're going to need a couple of specialized things. This is an Eastwood 175. This is actually a kit they sell that's sort of specifically sort of tailored to people that want to do aluminum. The big difference you're going to see in a MIG setup for aluminum over a MIG setup for steel is going to be this baby right here. This is a spool gun. So with MIG welding, we've got a electrode that's a consumable electrode that is essentially a wire that runs through this cable. Here's the wire right here. Wire runs through this cable. This wire makes contact with your workpiece, creates the short circuit, melts itself into the workpiece, and then continually feeds itself through the gun onto the workpiece. With when you're welding steel, the wire is much more substantial, or much more rigid, I should say. The wire is contained. Oh, I just broke it. So the wire is normally contained right there on that spool if you're welding steel. The tricky part with aluminum, however, is the aluminum wire much softer than the wire you're going to use for steel. So you can't push a rope. You'd never be able to push that aluminum wire from this machine all the way out through the handle onto the workpiece. So you're going to use what's called a spool gun. This is one of the big differences you're going to see in a steel MIG versus an aluminum MIG, which is a spool gun. Instead of your wire going in your machine, your wire goes right here on the gun. It's only got to push it about 4 inches before it's out the tip right there. Much shorter distance, much straighter run. You can push a rope a little bit. You can't push it all the way out this handle, but you can push it far enough that you can mount the wire up here in your gun, and this becomes a sort of self-contained wire and tip. Now, it's a little bit bigger than a standard MIG handle. You get used to it pretty good. I actually really like the pistol grip on it rather than the sort of straight grip on a traditional MIG welder. It's actually a lot more comfortable. It's a little big, but it's something you get used to. The other thing that's going to be a big difference between a steel setup and an aluminum setup is the type of shielding gas you're using. So when you're doing these processes, you're creating a lot of heat. You're creating a lot of you're separating some of the gases in the air into their component parts because you're creating this very powerful catalyst of heat and electricity. So what you do is you blast the area you're welding with a shielding gas to create sort of an inert bubble around your weld, because there's certain chemicals you don't want getting into that weld. Hydrogen, for example, if you introduce a lot of hydrogen into a weld, you're going to create a lot of porosity. Once the weld seals around those hydrogen atoms, like, I don't know what happens, they expand or they start making long distance phone calls or something, and it creates a lot of porosity in that weld. So you want to get all those other elements out of there, so you shield it with a gas. So with traditional MIG welding, you're using a gas that's usually like 75% argon, 25% CO2. With aluminum MIG, you are using 100% argon. Argon is a completely non-reactive gas. It's like the third most prolific gas in the universe, or the third most prolific element in the universe. I mean, there's just billions of tons of it floating around there. So But the nice thing is it is completely non-reactive. So we're using 100% argon to create an inert bubble around our weld area. And that's going to keep those stray molecules and other stray chemicals out of there, and hopefully help us, get proper penetration on the weld, get proper and even heating. And I keep looking over here to see if we have any questions. A good stainless steel brush, remove the oxidation. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about prepping our metal. Actually, before we talk about prepping the metal, let's talk about where we got the metal. And this is just a fun little aside. I was looking for some pieces to practice on, and came across a place that we just have a couple of them in Florida now. It's a place called Metal Supermarket, and I know a lot of you guys are probably familiar with Metal Supermarket because they're all over the country. There's like 100 stores worldwide, like 90 of them are in the U.S. We just started getting some in Florida, and if you have one nearby, it's really, really cool. Metal Supermarket is, well, they build themselves as the convenience store for metal, and that's very much what they are. They're a supplier that has enough stuff there for the industrial crowd, but will sell small enough quantities to the hobbyist crowd. So if you're building a whole roll cage, you're probably going to order from an industrial supplier, but if you want to add a crossbar to your roll cage, the Metal Supermarket in Jacksonville I walked into had some inch and 5/8, inch and 3/4 DLM roll cage tubing right there on the shelf. So they have lots of really cool stuff for the hobby level person that just wants to do some work and doesn't need to order stuff by the ton. So we'll throw a link up to them. But yeah, I'm a big fan, and they were great. They're all locally owned, so you're supporting local businesses wherever you are. A lot of cool folks. The one in Jacksonville, and we had one just open in Orlando this week too. So I'm excited to get over there. Other thing they have is if you go there for no other reason, get one of these babies. It's their metal reference guide. It is a cheat sheet to physical properties of a lot of different common metals and most of the stuff that they will stock in all of the stores. So we can just turn to the aluminum section and see that 6061 aluminum angle has a tensile strength of 45,000 psi and a yield point of 40,000 psi and a Brinell hardness of 95, whereas alloy steel has a hardness of 285 and a tensile strength of 140,000. So you can just kind of see general properties of different metals. So when you walk in there and the guy says, "What do you want, cold roll or hot roll? Do you want 6061 or you want 6063 or whatever the aluminum?" You can at least kind of point to something and go, "I want that," like you're pointing to a burrito menu at Taco Bell or something. It's a really, really handy, cool book. So yeah, if you're anywhere in Orlando, Jacksonville, check it out. So Andy says, I thought methane was more prevalent. Yes, Andy, I believe you're right. Argon is like the third most prevalent elemental gas. I believe like methane and maybe like nitrogen are 1 and 2. I don't keep track of gas prevalence in the atmosphere. I should, but I do not keep perfect track. So let's start getting into it. So Dinesh says, keep some potatoes on hand in case of accidentally looking into the light. Okay, why? see now I feel bad. Something's going to happen, and I'm going to wish I had a potato, and there's going to be a horrible industrial accident. All right, so let's get ready to actually lay a couple of beads down here. And again, I'll preface this by saying I've not done this much yet because I wanted I wanted you to be a part of the process, and I wanted you to see how somebody who is very average in skill, how quickly they can or can't pick this up. So I had Metal Supermarket cut me a bunch of little pieces of 1/4 inch. So if you're welding aluminum, you're just starting out, I recommend you practice on thicker pieces. 1/4 inch is probably going to make the best practice pieces. Another physical property of aluminum that makes it tricky to weld is, versus steel anyway, is it has way better thermal conductivity than steel. Aluminum conducts heat about 6 times better than steel in most cases. So what's that tell us about what the weld's going to be like? Well, it tells us that as we're welding a piece, that piece is going to preheat itself further down the joint much faster than steel is going to. So the base temperature of that metal is going to increase dramatically, down the road from where we're welding, much more so than if we're welding a steel piece. So that tells us we might have to actually think about accelerating through the weld a little bit, since by the time we get to the end of a weld bead, the area we'll be welding on will have heated by a couple hundred degrees relative to a steel piece, where without that thermal conductivity, the heat is staying much more concentrated in one place. So we know it melts at a lower temperature, so we're probably going to want to keep our welds fairly quick. We're going to want to keep that pathway quick as we're moving through the weld, and we may even want to think about slightly accelerating that pace as we go through the weld. So Dinesh says his welding instructor always told him that potato cut in half, one on each eye, was great. I really think your welding instructor was screwing with you. Have you really? Okay, so that's true. So apparently it's an in-joke among welding instructors everywhere. That a lot of them know about it. All right, so let's get ready to do this, and we'll just hopefully lay a couple of beads down here, and go about our way. So got a couple pieces of 1/4 inch here. We're going to prep this with first we're going to remove any oils from it. I'm using a little bit of CRC electronic cleaner. So funny story. I'm famous for, despite the fact that CRC is a supporter of this show, I always seem to end up using a product on the show that CRC makes a different version of, not realizing that in CRC's 15,000 different part numbers, they made the stuff that we were actually using. So like I was using some spray adhesive one time, not realizing that CRC made it. So I made it a point today to just sit down at my computer and Google CRC Weld Prep. Well, it turns out that CRC just in the last couple of days, in fact, they just sent the press release out today. CRC just acquired a company called Weld Aid, who specializes in welding prep chemicals. So we actually just got an email from our contact at CRC tonight, seeing that we were doing a welding show. She thought it was fun and nice timing. So yeah, congratulations to CRC. I don't know how much of that is going to end up in the consumer range. I know Weld Aid does mostly chemicals for industrial welding prep. Hopefully that trickles down to us, and we have some nice welding prep chemicals from CRC pretty soon. But for now, we're using some of their QD electronic cleaner, and I'm using this for a couple reasons. It's a good de-oiler, degreaser. It's also highly volatile. It flashes off very quickly and very thoroughly. So when we do start welding, we're not going to have a lot of it left over on the piece that's going to catch on fire and possibly singe my eyebrows off or something. So everybody online is now taking bets on what's going to flash off. Yeah, this may not be the perfect thing to use, but it is the most effective thing to use, and it does completely flash off of there. So I wouldn't use brake clean. I would use brake clean for almost everything else. I wouldn't use brake clean for welding prep. Other thing we want to do is we want to give these pieces a nice wire brushing, and we talked about that oxide layer earlier, and we want to give them a brushing with a stainless steel wire brush that is just used for aluminum. I've actually written on this one, aluminum only, so we don't contaminate these bristles with other types of metals. And then when we're scrubbing off a piece of aluminum or any ferrous metals in there or something else we've brushed on and contaminating the weld, making our jobs more difficult. So we will give these a nice little brushing. And if I was going to be completely anal about this, I would probably also make sure I didn't get any of my finger juices on there. But we're all friends here, and I think this is going to be just fine. You guys, thanks for coming along for the ride, by the way. This, as Elon Musk said of his project in the last couple days, this is either going to be a spectacular success or a spectacular failure. Either way, it's going to be spectacular. All right, so we're going to get this piece set up in our little jig here. So obviously, with steel, you can use magnets and stuff to hold it in place. With aluminum, you've got to have one of these. This is an aluminum magnet, and these are very, very hard to find. But look at that! Isn't that awesome? I'm screwing with you. There's no such thing. So you actually, I had somebody was Googling aluminum magnet though. I guarantee that actually happened. In my head, that happened. So you actually, when you're doing this aluminum stuff, you've got to fix your workpiece in place mechanically, and or make sure it is set nicely. Just like with the MIG, you've got a ground clamp that we will attach to one of our pieces here. And get our helmet ready, and we will get to welding here. Okay, let's talk about our machine settings here. So again, I've done very, very little of this, so I am still feeling my way through some of these settings here. But here's what I know just based on knowing the physical properties of aluminum. I know that my voltage is going to be a little bit lower than it would typically be for metal of a commensurate thickness. So if I was welding 1/4 inch thick steel, I'd be using a lot more voltage than I'm using to weld this 1/4 inch thick aluminum. I also know because the wire melts so fast and so thoroughly, my wire speed needs to be a little bit faster than it would for a similar thickness of steel. So I've got my my voltage set probably about 1/2 to 2/3 of where it would be for steel, and I've got my wire speed set 20 to 30% higher than where it would be for steel, and we're just going to see how it goes. We will take a swing and see how it works. All right, anybody? This is your last chance to place wagers. Yeah, this is an auto darkening helmet. And we're going to throw a piece of welding glass in front of the lens while we do this. I don't know how well it's going to work, but we'll see how it goes. Oh, other thing that I should warn you about too is when you're learning to weld aluminum, you are going to go through an epic amount of welding tips. You can get a lot of burn back. It's very easy to get burn back when you're welding aluminum, where the wire actually fuses itself inside the tip. So when you're just starting out, invest in a bunch of tips. We're probably going to change a couple tonight because, like I say, I'm still working on this. So we are on. Oh, let's turn our shielding gas on. That's set. I like to put a little bit more light on my weld. The more light you can get on it, better off you're going to be. And we are just going to give it a shot here, and I'm going to rush through this a little bit, accelerate through it, and you will be witness to the very first bead of aluminum welding that I ever do officially. So here we go, folks. Here goes nothing. You ready? Okay. So let's take a look and see what we can see. I'll need to get my glasses back on for this. All right. So we can see that the weld is kind of sooty. That is not unusual at all with the MIG process of aluminum. I don't know if you guys could see anything while I was actually doing the bead, but I was hauling ass through there. Like I would say it was like I basically had one hand on the gun, and I was moving about like this. I mean, I was moving in a fairly quick pattern. So you actually have to kind of get that sweep ready. It's not like steel welding where you can back up and make those little C's. But if we take our brush, that soot brushes right off, and that's not, for my first aluminum bead ever, I'm going to say that is not half bad. Tom, can you get a decent shot of that? All right, so what can we learn from this bead? So we can see that at the start we had some spattering, we had some incomplete penetration, and we had a little bit of mounding here. The mounding is more than likely going a little bit too slow, or not quite having enough heat. We can see here as I started to accelerate through the weld, though, we actually have a nice bead going through there, and pretty good coverage in there. So let's look at the back. We don't have any penetration coming through the back, so that means we can probably throw a little bit more heat at pieces this size, and with more heat is going to have to maybe come a little bit more speed. But if I was welding this up, I'd probably do both sides of it anyway. Actually, let's do the other side now. We've done this sort of interior joint, so I'll have to brush this off, Tom. So give it a second. So we'll give that a nice brushing. Dean said, oh, actually, you know what? That is a great idea. Hang on for 1 second. Instead of doing this piece, let me take this piece to the cold saw, and let's just cut right. It's going to get really, really loud here for a second. So if you are listening on headphones, you might want to turn them down. In 3, 2, 1, cut. Okay. So what can we chop this in half right across the weld. And what can we see here? What can we learn? So we actually have, okay, so unlike a steel weld, we actually don't see much, if any, separation between the weld material and the base material. And in steel, you'd almost like sometimes see like an ice core going through there. But we got penetration. You probably can't see on camera, but we did get penetration about halfway through the base metal. So if we were to do it on both sides, you know, that would be pretty complete penetration for this 1/4 inch here. And I'm pretty happy with that. Like I say, if we're just talking about this piece here, for my first ever shot, it's still a little warm. First ever shot welding that's a fairly good looking bead, considering I have no idea what I'm doing. So again, if I can do this, chances are you can learn to do this as well. So this setup here from Eastwood, machine, spool gun, basically ready to weld. All you need to do is add a gas bottle, is like $500, and I think it goes on sale cheaper than that sometimes. We have a question from Ed.
What wire are you using?
We are using a 30 thousandths aluminum wire. It's the wire that came with the kit, and I have not really experimented. I haven't gotten far enough into the process to experiment with different diameter wires. I had a bunch of 30 thousandths tips, and I knew I was going to be going through a lot of tips, so those are the tips that I used. All right, see if we have any other questions. Dean mentioned preheating aluminum. Yeah, so preheating is definitely an option if you're going to preheat an aluminum piece, especially if it's thicker. If we were doing this for production, something this thick, you would probably want to preheat, and that is going to allow you to not necessarily accelerate through the weld quite as much as you would going from ambient temperature to then heating that metal. If you're going to preheat aluminum, the rule of thumb I've heard, 200 to 220 degrees, get it up to about there, and it helps sort of stabilize that temperature ramp as you're getting into the weld. So I'm gonna hit the back side of this thing again. Looks like we are caught up on questions there, and we'll see if we can repeat our success. Get our light down here. And you notice that I'm turning the gas off after every weld. It takes a little bit longer, but it's just a habit I've gotten into because too many times I have come out to the shop and started a welding project and realized I left the gas on and it all leaked out of my cheap regulator overnight, and I can't weld. So I've gotten really good about turning that gas completely off between jobs. All right, other tip I'm gonna give you here is always start an aluminum weld with a freshly clipped piece of wire, and you're also going to want to use a little more stick out with aluminum than you are with steel. You're going to want to actually more than double your stick out. Stick out is the amount of wire sticking out of the end of the gun. With steel, you're going to start about 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, somewhere in there. With aluminum, you want to basically double that. You're talking about 7/8 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, up to an inch of stick out. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting a lot of burn back, where the wire actually burns itself up into the tip. Okay, so we got a real short one here. We'll see if we can just zip through this one. Tom, you ready with the shield?
Yep.
All right, here we go. All right, let's take a look at this one. So I'll say right off, this one is a little messier, but that's more of a technique thing. on my end. The start and stop are definitely better. The problem that I always have with welding is the start and the stop. One thing I'm trying to make myself do with the aluminum is actually start moving the gun and time my trigger actuation for the moment that wire hits the beginning of my weld. Much less forgiving than welding steel. With steel, you can kind of start hogging into it, melt that puddle, and push that puddle along. With this, you do not have the luxury of that time. You basically got to get that weld going and got to keep it going all the way through there. So let's brush this off, see how it looks. All right, it's a little bit tall. I think that was probably me going a little bit slower. We've got a little bit of wire slag here right at the beginning. We can take that off, but if we look at the ends, we got fairly good penetration going all the way through on the ends now. I mean, this is definitely not as pretty as my first try on the interior, and I actually missed the joint a little bit in a couple of spots right there. But pretty much the stuff that's wrong with this is all on me at this point. The actual metallurgy going on there is not real heinous. So we're gonna leave that alone and start a new piece. All right, got a question from YouTube. Greg wants to know, what is the gas regulator set at? We are set a little high from what they recommended. Let me double check here to make sure I'm giving you accurate numbers. I believe the instruction manual recommended like 4 pounds of gas pressure. We're at about 7. That's just kind of a habit that I have. I always seem to weld better and have a cleaner weld with a little more gas pressure. I don't know if it's prevailing currents here in the shop or just sort of my style. But you know, use the recommendation as just that. You use it as a recommendation for where to start. If you find your welds are getting very spattery and you've got just pieces that look like a porcupine, you got pieces of stick and you've got pieces of spattered, you know, popping off of there. Throw another pound or so of gas pressure at it. You know, get that shielded area as clean and as inert as you possibly can. So yeah, about 7 pounds on this regulator. And regulators can probably vary a little bit too. Had another couple of questions. Oh, Dean said he can't see when the shield is in front of the camera. You know what? I'm okay with that because our camera costs as much as a Miata, and I'm not going to fry the sensor tonight. And I'm not doing anything impressive enough here for you to really worry about seeing. Actually, if you want to see an expert do this, Eastwood has a fantastic video on. So you can basically go from an idiot who can actually accomplish this to an expert that can show you how to do this right. Just go to Eastwood's YouTube page, and they have a great video on this. Had another question. So Dean wants to know, are you pushing or pulling your weld? I am pushing. What Dean means by that is when you lay these beads down, you're gonna, if this is your welding tip, I'm gonna use this because it's not blazing hot. If this is your welding tip, you got gas coming out of that tip. If you're moving along in the direction the tip is pointing, you're pushing your weld. If you're basically behind the weld, dragging it along, you're pulling the weld. You're mostly going to want to pull, or sorry, to push the weld. You're going to, this is my sort of layman's understanding, is you're going to put more heat into the weld if you're pulling it, just because of the way the electrode's making contact with the base metal. You're also going to have to run a little bit more wire speed because you're basically moving against the way that wire is running.
When you push it, it actually focuses the heat in front of where you're going.
Okay, yeah, right. And then yeah, if you're pushing it, you're actually keeping the heat ahead of your weld rather than keeping the heat behind your weld. So especially on steel, makes it a little easier because you're sort of pre-softening that material as you get you move into it. So we had another question, do you always have to move that fast through the welding of aluminum? If the thicker it is, the slower you can go. Generally, if you look at our numbers over here, just looking at where steel melts versus where aluminum melts, you've got a much lower melt point for aluminum. So that stuff is melting really, really fast, and that wire is zapping off there really fast. So yeah, in general, welding aluminum is, thickness for thickness, you're going to move about twice as fast as you are moving going through a piece of steel. Now, if you watch the guys that are really, really good, they can actually do that kind of nice little C-shaped stack of dimes thing even with aluminum. That's a level of skill that I have not attained with aluminum yet. I can do that with steel fairly well, but the couple of quickie times I tried that with aluminum, I was burning holes and stuff. So you've got to, and I'm actually going to try a much thinner piece here in a minute and see how that goes. And I don't think it's going to go well, but we'll have our fingers crossed. So yeah, your speeds for doing aluminum are going to be much, much higher than for doing similar thicknesses of steel. Question from YouTube, what if you turn down the voltage and wire speed? Yeah, the answer is probably. You're still working with a much different type of metal. In a month, we'll come back and we'll do a follow-up show, and I will let you know more findings. We're going to do a thinner piece here in a minute, and we're going to have to turn both volume and wire speed down a little bit. I'm just going to be making some sort of educated guesses, but what I've seen so far is you can't come in aluminum with a MIG just by saying, okay, it's just like steel but softer. It's welding aluminum versus welding steel with a MIG is kind of like tennis and racquetball. They are both sports that use a ball and a racket. But there are variations and complexities in both that make them, even though they are using similar tools, make them very different. You have to sort of, you can understand some of the basic processes coming from the world of steel, but you cannot instantly pick this up. I'm actually quite surprised that I was able to lay down beads this effective that quickly. And I'm looking forward to getting more into it. So we're going to try a thinner piece here. Let me see if I'm caught up on questions. Yeah, Dean says cheap regulators can be off a little bit. Use it for repeatability, not so much as for the actual number. Yeah, that's always a good piece of advice, because you want to. I don't know whether 7 psi on that gauge is 7 actual psi. So let's clean a couple of these thin pieces. So that was 1/4 inch we were using originally. This is 1/8 inch, and I have not laid a single electrode down on 1/8 inch yet. So all of I can't even call it practicing. I didn't want to do much practicing, because I did want to try and sort of learn in real time here with you guys and see how I was going to be able to adapt to this. But I just did some function checks and made sure everything was working, and everything I've done was on 1/4 inch. Okay, and I've not managed to seriously injure myself yet, partially due to this stylish Eastwood welding jacket. Seriously, Eastwood is also a longtime supporter of our magazine. We just gave away some really cool Eastwood stuff as part of our shop contest. So yeah, Dean says, what are the odds that we will get burned through? I'd say the odds are very, very high that we will get burned through on this 1/8 inch stuff, because I am flying completely blind on this. So I think the takeaway message that we've learned tonight is for 500 bucks, which is considerably cheaper than a TIG setup, and I think ultimately less complex than a TIG setup, and less technique intensive than a TIG setup. You can successfully weld aluminum. I mean, if I stayed here all night and went through all 14 of these pieces and a bottle of gas, I feel like I could probably get pretty good at this. Now, am I going to this weekend make a seat bracket that I will then go run VIR with? Maybe not this weekend, maybe in June. I will be confident enough to do that. I would be more than confident enough to make a piece of equipment that my own safety did not depend on at this point. And you always have a grinder. I mean, does it really matter how ugly your welds are if you have a grinder available? The answer is no. Okay, so let's give that one more little hit with the brush there. Okay, so this is 1/8 inch. And yeah, if I was a betting man now, I would take the under on this. So I think what we're going to do on this is we're going to turn our wire speed down by about 20%. We're going to turn our voltage down by about 30, or we're going to almost cut our voltage in half. We're cutting our thickness in half, so we're going to cut our voltage by about 30 or 40%. And I am gonna blaze ass through this one, and because I think this stuff is just gonna melt off like crazy. But we'll see. Wish me luck. Okay, we'll clip our wire back. Start with a nice, fresh end of the wire there, and here we go. Tommy, ready? Gloveless, ladies and gentlemen. Totally forgot the gloves. That's fine though. I'm a trained professional. We'll put the gloves on to pick it up though. Okay, so we'll put the right glove on the right hand. So let's see what we got here. So I don't know if you could see that through the shield we had on the camera, but I was absolutely flying through there. Brush that off. Okay, we got a little bit coming through the backside here. So our heat was probably just about right on. Our technique, however, was not in the beginning anyway. This is just hot garbage here in the beginning. But you can see I kind of got my act together a little bit here towards the end, and got my speed right, and towards the end part here, I'm going to put some more. Towards the end part there, actually kind of got things together and got a pretty good bead going. But yeah, I missed the joint there in the beginning. The speeds you have to attain doing this stuff make your technique really important. But
Light's not helping.
okay,
Makes it shiny.
just makes it shiny. So yeah, we actually have a nice bead in this last half of it. The initial half of it, you know, it's not a horrible bead. It just isn't on the joint, which is just a result of me not having my path going straight enough through there. But the back half of that actually looks fairly good. We also had, you saw before I brushed the soot off, we also had a fairly even distribution of soot both on top and on the bottom. And there wasn't a ton of soot. There was a kind of a soot outline on the outside of those welds. that's kind of a result of where you're at with the gas pressure and the gas shielding. If your soot is completely on one side or the other, you're probably holding the gun at the wrong angle. You're probably not getting complete gas coverage on one side, getting too much gas coverage on the other side. So adjust your gun angle a little bit. If the soot is completely surrounding the weld and just a ton of it, your pressure is probably too low. You're not getting enough gas onto the weld. All right, let's take one last look here for questions. So yeah, Dean says you want that sound of sizzling bacon. That's a sort of a great reference point. Your sound should be consistent across the weld, and it basically sounds like sizzling bacon, or to me, the thing that pops into my head is a mad scientist laboratory, and one of those bzzz things that's in the background of every mad scientist laboratory, and it's a consistent sound. If you start to get pops, basically that means the electrode is coming off of your workpiece. So if you've got zzz, pop, 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 and so you're generally at that point, that means your wire speed is too slow. You're not keeping that wire in contact with your workpiece enough. It's melting back, coming off of the workpiece. Increase your wire speed a little bit. Keep that wire in the puddle. Let's see. Yeah, Ian says, I'm not welding in Crocs for a change. I have been known late at night, I'm out here working on something, I need to tack two pieces together, and I've been known to leave the Crocs on and weld some stuff, and I tell you what, it's not the safest thing in the world, but you get really good at doing that sort of Croc weld dance where you keep your feet out of the way. So am I recommending people do that? And am I recommending people wear Crocs to begin with? I wouldn't do that to you. I'm your buddy. You know, we're all friends here. But you know, use proper shop safety. Don't end up like this. Nobody wants to end up like this. All right, guys, we are coming towards the end of the show here. Thank you very much for hanging out tonight. Yeah, Dinesh says I need to buy a set of welding Crocs. If Crocs made welding shoes, I know where they could find a spokesperson, is all I'm saying. So if anybody has a hookup at Croc Co., let me know. Folks, that is going to be it for the show now. I am very impressed. Well, we threw up some links to this very welder at Eastwood. They are supporters of our magazine, so if you are looking for a MIG, we recommend you give a start there. They're nice folks. Always want to help you out. They have a live broadcast of their own on Facebook, so give them a like on Facebook. You'll get notifications about that. I am very impressed. I think I just saved myself a bunch of money and a bunch of hassle in buying a TIG welder and learning how to TIG weld for doing some light aluminum fabrication. I'm really, really impressed with how quickly we were able to get this up and running and actually successfully lay down some weld beads here. So thanks everybody for hanging out tonight. Somebody just bought one of these 5 minutes ago through Jegs. How awesome is that? We're actually selling welders tonight. Before you go, folks, let me remind you about our friends. We got 2 welding books from Auto Books, Aero Books we're going to put up tonight if Ed hasn't already done it. Not only do they have fantastic books on fabrication and fantastic books on automotive history and shop manuals and photography books and travel logs and just fantastic printed matter from every era. They are a hub of automotive activity in Southern California, and they are friends of the show, and they are fine people. So check them out online, autobooks-aerobooks.com. Check them out in Burbank if you're ever out there. Live stuff going on at the shop there every Saturday practically, and a bunch of other times as well. There's author signing books, there's cool stuff going on. So yeah, support a very, very cool business by checking out Autobooks-Aerobooks. And also, remember our friends at CRC Industries, now the parent company of Weld Aid, who is a welding prep chemical company. We hope to be using some of their stuff on a future weld project. Check them out at crcindustries.com. Let's see what we got up here on the shelf. So here's Here's proof that we are huge fans of CRC. Here's a grody fingerprint stained can of brake clean that we were using during our shock install on the MR2 last week. This is how fond we are of CRC Chemicals. They are a fantastic company that not only makes great stuff, but supports the world that we live in, that world of amateur and professional motorsports at every level. So if you're reaching for automotive chemicals, baby, and you're grabbing that CRC stuff, you know you're not only getting a good product, you're helping out the community, you know, giving a little bit back to the stuff you love to do, and we appreciate that. What's the deal of the month? We're giving away shirts, or
$20 for a year subscription, and you get a free T-shirt.
Did you guys hear that? $20 for a year of Grassroots Motorsports, and you get a Grassroots Motorsports T-shirt with that subscription. So if you're a new subscriber, or if you're not yet a subscriber to Grassroots Motorsports, you want to subscribe, hit up our website at grassrootsmotorsports.com. The deal of the month is on there somewhere. You can find it. We'll throw a link up on Facebook and YouTube for it. And if you want to start a new sub, or if you want to renew an existing sub, great chance to get a free T-shirt. $20, you get a year, you get a free T-shirt. That is a heck of a deal. Dee wants to know what is next week. Oh, I would love to let you know what is next week. Our good friend, professional race car driver and all-around cool guy, Rob Holland, is coming on next week. He'll join us live via satellite, talk about his trip up Pikes Peak last year in a supercharged Corvette, talk about all the cool stuff he does with Rotec Racing over at the Nürburgring, and talk about just what a generally cool guy he is. I am not too proud to admit that Rob Holland is one of my all-time hugest man crushes, and any chance I get to talk to Rob is a fun time. So he will join us live via satellite next week, be able to talk to a real live professional race car driver, all-around cool guy. Week after that, another special deal. SCCA Hayward Wagner is going to be live on the show, announcing live, first time ever, that a rules package has been announced on a live webcast. They'll be announcing the rules package. We'll be going over it for SCCA's new time trial program. We'll be talking about classing, talking about event structure, and we'll be talking about it all live, announcing the rules package 2 weeks from tonight here on the show with Hayward Wagner. So you definitely want to join us for that. And the week after that, we're just going to fight. We're just going to get drunk and we're just going to fight each other in the shop here. It's going to be super fun. All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all the likes. Thank you for all the shares. Thank you for being part of this broadcast every week and letting your friends know and hanging out and having a great time with us. And thanks for reminding me that I didn't have my gloves on when I welded that last thing. Appreciate that, guys, a lot, really. Thank you. And that is it for tonight. We will sign off with that. Okay, yeah, Ed just threw up a link to the deal of the month, so you can just click on that and go and get that. It's all good, baby. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night. Thanks to Tom working camera tonight. Thanks to Ed over monitoring our social media. Chris could not be here tonight. He had something else going on. And we're sure whatever it is, it's exciting, but we got a great crew involved in these broadcasts every week, and we appreciate them giving up a weeknight to be out here doing that. So thanks very much to those guys. Folks, I'm JG Pasterjack. Thanks for joining us tonight. We will see you again next week.